Today we're joined with Sarah Hutton, the Interim Dean of the University of Massachusetts Amherst Libraries. She's a researcher, author, and faculty member. Her years of experience and guidance will help us bring this story together, how we all can find our path. Welcome, Sarah, to this podcast. Thanks so much for agreeing to join us.
Thank you. Thank you for extending the invitation. Great to be here.
That's it. So tell me about your role and how did you get here? I know that's a big question.
That is a big question. Gosh, the lead up. Um, so I'll start from the present and then kind of work backwards. So I'm currently serving as in an interim Dean of Libraries role at UMass Amherst, as you mentioned. It's an R1. It's like a top tier research intensive university, 3 library locations. I oversee a staff of around 150 employees. Gosh, well, it depends. Over the past couple of years, our levels of life has interrupted us. Well, that's so another big part of my life, aside from my job, is I have 2 young children, 5 and a 7-year-old, Oleander and Viola, respectively. And that was Oli that just barged in here.
Because he was just saying hi. He wants to see his mom.
He was just saying hi. No, it's lovely. I love the bargains. It's those kinds of surprising moments that kind of break up the day, I guess. Yeah.
So your current role is this library with lots of different people doing lots of different things.
Yeah.
What's a challenge that you find that you deal with in your day-to-day right now?
That's a
loaded question.
Yeah, it sure is. But I mean, it's not, my challenges are not unique. I think, I've been working in this library before I was appointed to my interim dean position, and that was in August of 2021. I had been leading an area in the libraries that was dedicated to supporting, public-facing services, and we all went through the pandemic together, and it was incredibly challenging. There was, a lot of stress, anxiety, fear, and a lot of coordination with, environmental health and safety and, different campus planners. It was this entirely different and new landscape of the same job I'd already been doing. So it was very interesting to transition into that quite suddenly. And, I'd already had a leadership role in the organization, and then I took on one that was kind of a new form. And so I think one of the reasons why I then, just, I won't go through the whole process of how interim deans are appointed, but I, was nominated and asked to do the job. And I felt like that, navigating through that tumult really prepared me for that. And you still will never be prepared for that uncertainty that you're going to see, whether you're navigating the tail end of a pandemic or the uncertain future of higher education, or dealing with members of the public, or any of that, just navigating life in general. And so, like, I would say one of my big challenges is people. I think really, it's true. People, humans, working with humans are the most delightful and unpredictable part of my job, and have been of any job I've ever had, because you can't control how people think, how they interact with you. No matter what you do, you can try your best. And especially in navigating this very strange space at the tail end of this pandemic, or maybe it's the start of a new one, I don't know.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not, knock on wood. But you have you're leading people in leadership positions are going through the same stress and panic and uncertainty, and are also leading and trying to provide guidance and stability for an entire organization. That's really hard.
Oh, it
It's
is.
really hard. I mean, to talk about making space and taking space, and it's, you put in so much extra effort to take and make space for your organization, and then what does that leave for you? It's like how you can't back up that far from what you're doing,
Right, exactly.
So yeah, that's been the biggest challenge currently. I mean,
So
there's
do you find yourself having to do to-do lists or other things in order to keep yourself focused?
to keep myself focused. Well, so there are a lot of different ways in which I orchestrate my own work, in my own research, in my, in my doctoral research, my own personal research, in my own work, in my home life. Like I'm managing, spinning. There are many plates spinning, right?
Right.
And so like I will use anything that is available to capture the moment, anything from a napkin to a very painfully detailed Trello board that articulates a collaborative project to any random piece of software that somebody throws at me. It's really whatever captures the work of the moment and is a light lift to use and a low point of entry for when you want to pick it back up again. I'll give an example of how work within the libraries is orchestrated. We have this, governance council, leadership council that really serves as the main body of communication. And we meet every week. This is something that was formed during the pandemic, and it was really it's all the department heads and the administrative leaders, basically the dean's cabinet. We meet every week to touch base on what's going on, what's going on
Wow,
with the
that's really
facilities, what's
great.
going on with the people, all this. And we have orchestrated this communication system where, we manage everything. We're a Microsoft 360 shop. And so we have OneDrive and Exchange and all that, on Outlook and all that jazz.
Right.
And so we maintain notes from these meetings and share them with all of the staff and libraries to be like, this is what happened, and
Oh, that's great. It's really transparent.
it is. And and also, I mean, one of the things that I think we've been really successful at together over the past 9 months during my appointment is this communication structure.
Mm-hmm.
And it serves to organize my work because I have this ecosystem of documentation that stretches between my one-on-one direct reports, when I meet with certain groups, and this leadership council agenda, or my weekly emails out to all the library system capture the updates. Like I always have them open. And I'm like, this is what I need to send out this week. And that's really what helps to organize and drive the work when you have so many different pieces just like flying all over the place, really.
Well,
Unpredictable. Like I can't even. Yes.
well, that's great. Now,
Yeah.
did your background in before this in either college or other positions help to drive you this transparent culture that you've developed?
Well, my foundational degree, undergraduate, is in counseling. And I had a dual minor in psychology and art. My intent was to become an arts therapist. That's really the
And arts therapy, that's really cool.
yeah. At the time, I'm about a bazillion years old. And so this was back in when Lesley University was still Lesley College. And they had, three majors really. And it was one of the only three colleges on the East Coast that offered arts therapy as a specialization, as a track. And the reason why I went in that direction, and I mentioned this too because I think it's important to mention, like, this is where my maker roots come from too.
Right.
Is that all I wanted to do was go to art school. That's all I wanted to do is do studio art programs to become an artist. Like I just love building, painting, everything. And I was in like gifted art programs and whatnot, like when I was a kid. But I grew up in rural Maine. There wasn't a lot available pre-internet there.
Right.
And my family didn't have, we were working class, didn't have a lot of money. And my dad had come from a family of factory workers. And when it came time for me to look for colleges, he was like, absolutely not. There's no way you're going to art school because you can't make any money. You really can't. And so I remember that like the one and only college visit we did was to RIT. because he was like,
Wow.
you can do graphic design. I was also like on the math team and all this stuff too, because
Mhm.
I've got I guess like an engineer's predisposition, I guess, in that sense of, you should go to an institute for tech, you need to do something to make money. And art therapy was kind of the compromise, because I was like,
Okay.
well, I could get a job as a psychologist and make money while also doing studio art. And that's what led to that kind of direction. And I think that, again, that foundational degree, I haven't, I've got other degrees I've gotten over the years and other experiences, but I do really feel like that foundational degree speaks so much to your disposition
True.
and like what kind of lays the groundwork from which you draw in how you approach the rest of your work. At least that's what I found for myself, because it's always been, very human centered for me,
Right.
very human centered, very creative. And that, dovetails into human centered design and an empathy based approach in all of my leadership work, and in my teaching. And that wasn't something that I intentionally set out to do. It's just, that's how it, kind of like looking back now, I'm like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And honestly, I hear that more when people reflect back to me like, oh, this is what you do. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I do, yeah, I do teach like human centered to, yeah, so it's, I think that, there was that foundational degree. And then basically, like, I wanted to be a therapist and
Right.
help. I've always been attracted to the populations that are kind of like the gap populations that
Mhm.
nobody really, because that's the greatest need, right?
Oh, it's a big need.
Yeah, yeah. And so I did crisis counseling with adolescent girls, and I did, and these girls were in some pretty dire circumstances. And I knew then, and I know now, that like I was way too young to be engaging in that intensive kind of work. And so I needed to step back. And I literally, after I finished my undergrad, and I'd been interning at this residential facility as a crisis counselor, I was like, I'm going to take a year and work in a job that is just like whatever,
Right.
to kind
Just
of recalibrate, because a lot of people, like, there are these structured gap years. I think that taking that space is incredibly important. um
so you took a
i
structured gap year, and what'd you do?
I took a structured gap year. Well, and to be clear, it wasn't one of those like I did a program or traveled abroad, or I was really poor living in Boston with like 20 other people on minimum wage, and I was a
So
manager.
wait, you had 20 other people in the same house?
Not in this, well, okay, not 20 other people in the same house. Although I will tell you, I lived in an old Victorian in Brighton. No, there was the one in Arlington. It had like
Okay.
15 people in it because it was a 3-story, and it was
Right.
like a duplex, and it's like postdocs, recent
Yeah,
grads,
definitely.
and they're like, we can't afford to live in Boston. It's not a living wage,
Right.
and we all kind of we're okay with each other, and we're just gonna, yeah,
No, that's fine. A gap year doing that sounds
yeah,
fun. What'd you do?
yeah. Well, so I worked in a music store. I was a
Okay.
buyer in a music store and a used record store in downtown Boston, because I have a surprisingly extensive knowledge of music and production. And so I basically, like, it was, this was again a million years ago when used CD, I mean, there's still stores that you can buy and sell used CDs, but
Not
that was,
many.
not many.
Not
Well,
many.
there's Turn It
There's
Up in
more
the Pioneer
vinyl
Valley.
now, but there's vinyl. You can find
There's
vinyl stores.
vinyl. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there was some vinyl, but I was one of the people where, you'd have folks bring in stacks and stacks of CDs, and I would review them for, content, condition, production value, price it against inventory, and then like pay out to the person bringing it in. And I did that for a year. And then I was like, all right, I need to do something a bit more stimulating than this. Like, I took that year, and then I was like, okay, I see what that's like. Now what? And so what I ended up going back to is that, so during my undergrad, I was, because like I mentioned, my family didn't have a lot of money. I was a Pell Grant recipient. I was a work study student. I had like 3 different part-time jobs. And The work study job I had was in the library, was in Ludke Library. As a incoming first year, they reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in a job. I don't know what lists they were drawing from. I was really thankful that they did, because I wouldn't ever have thought,
Right.
So I worked with them in their interlibrary loan department. My first year, second year, third year, I studied abroad in New South Wales and Australia. And when I came back that second semester, they were like, "Oh, we had to hire someone else to fill your position, but we'll help you get this other one over in the Office of Information Technology." And so I worked in this group. It was kind of funny. It was 3 guys that were basically like, you imagine the khaki pants and like the blue plaid shirts, and it's like,
Right.
oh, here come the guys that are going to install your computers, and then you see this little punk girl with like the big hair and all the piercings and stuff, and I'm like, I am here to swap out your memory card, or what, we were
Right.
basically, we're doing like this massive hardware replacement for the Art Institute of Boston, and I just remember being with this troop of guys, and I felt like pretty cool, like, yeah, they're letting me join their group. Anyway, I
But
looked
that's
back at
great
that.
though.
Yeah.
That's a great experience, really
Yeah.
learning to do that. Sorry, go ahead. You were finishing looking back at
Oh,
that?
yeah. No, sorry. When I was thinking about what to do next, I thought back to the library.
Okay.
And that's really what then started steering my path forward for what I was actually going to do, like being able to kind of architect what I was going to do with my career.
That's great. And how'd your dad feel now that you got this degree?
Um, he he's super duper proud of me. I mean,
That's great.
he tells me about how he brags about me to his friends. I think that because he was he came from humble beginnings, and fought in Vietnam, came back, like that had its impacts, and he made a really nice pathway and career for himself, like, kind of finding his path and navigating a lot like I
Right.
did,
Yeah.
Not so much a career as maybe a career, I don't know, like you're just kind of like, what is going to be a fit? And he has always been really supportive. I think that, like, of course, like every parent is concerned about their child being able to be self-sufficient and support themselves, and especially if you come from humble beginnings, or a particular socioeconomic status, is going to stress you out way more. Like, I know
Right.
I stress a lot about money,
Oh yeah. Well, I know
even though I
exactly what
don't
you're talking
need
about.
to, like,
But I know
I've
what you're
been
talking
there.
about. I came from humble beginnings. I was a work study student myself
Mhm,
at Stony Brook in undergraduate admissions, and they were
mhm,
like, you had to figure that out, and
mhm,
that gives you like that grit you need to really develop and everything
mhm.
else. So
Yeah.
now you
It's
took.
Oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, go.
Well, I guess just a quick note, because I do think on this a lot now that I'm raising my own kids and thinking about like how they're going to navigate their lives. It's unfortunate that is where that comes from, that it's like going through these very painful and framing experiences to help you learn how to navigate, become self-sufficient and move forward. Like that's um I don't know, I guess it's just kind of like a side note that like it's unfortunate that like that's kind of the thing that gets you the result that you want for your children when you don't want to put them through that.
But I think you can do it anyway. I have a 20-year-old, and I can see he's still got those values that we've
Hmm.
brought up in him, and
Yeah.
you could see it coming out.
Yeah.
And yes, you may not have to go through that struggles that we went through,
Mhm.
but I definitely think it's that parenting and doing, even what you were doing with your son right now,
Mhm.
explaining and everything else, all that's that supportive nature that will
Mhm.
make them successful.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that my kids, like, I often talk to them about like when the picky eating thing comes up, being like, we should be so grateful for being having this food XYZ, and like just the, oh mom, really, you're going to talk about this? And every time I do. And so, yeah, good point.
Yeah, definitely.
That's it. That's where the values are getting instilled, is through
Oh,
just
trust me,
repetition.
what having college student who lives at home, you really see
Hmm.
some of what your behaviors in. And talking about that, my son likes to go out to lunch and he'll
Hmm.
buy something, but he won't buy a drink because he knows if he brings it home, he has a
Hmm.
drink at home, and that little savings will save him some of his money
Hmm.
and everything else.
Yeah.
And it's really made a big impact because we've tried to teach that to him, and that's
Yeah.
something he's gotten. So you see that little bit that you
Cool.
do in them. But you talked a lot about transparency and how you've done that, and that's really, you should be rewarded for that. I know a number of organizations where they aren't as transparent. Do you find
Mm-hmm.
that transparency is something that you learned throughout your career in the libraries, or why did you want to be so transparent to everybody in your organization? And I think it's really, you should be commended for that.
Mm. Well, hmm. No, that's interesting. I really approach everything I do from that learner mindset, right? Like I never claim I know all the answers. And in thinking about what and how I've learned in leadership over the
Mhm.
years, I've learned a lot by experiencing or observing what you shouldn't do. And well, no, I'm serious. But it, and there's a good reason for that, really. I mean, and it's asking those questions too, like about why wasn't this information shared, like,
Right.
and learning more about how the system works. And so I'll just give the example, like one of the reasons why, I have a master's degree in library and information science, and I'm an academic librarian by trade. I
Right.
do all this other stuff too, but like one of the reasons I started studying, doing a PhD in educational policy and leadership is so I could understand how that system works and learn
Okay.
more about why, like how the information flowed in certain areas and why some things weren't shared over here. And then being in some of these conversations over time, like I've navigated between at multiple institutions, but even just within UMass, like I've been in the faculty union, an elected faculty senator, on the executive faculty group, and then on the administrative side of the fence, and on the dean's council, and in administration of the library. So I've seen like all of the different sides, and I've really seen like what those pain points are.
Right.
And I also want to give a shout out, like that's the experiential bit, like from my years of doing this stuff, but I got a really good indication of how all of that would shake out from a leadership training program I did years ago through the Boston Library Consortium, where this is one of the best exercises I've ever seen done. And I'm not going to explain it in the best, or I'm just not going to be verbatim. But basically, what they do is that you have a case study, right? And
Right.
you have three different groups. You've got the staff on the ground, you've got the middle management, and then you've got the administrators. And like you're working, this exercise is done with a group, I think it was like 25 of us or something.
Okay.
You self-select into the group. I self-selected into administration because I was really curious, like, what is this going to be about? And there were like 3 or 4 of us in a room by ourselves, given a case study. And then the middle managers were given the same case study, but with different information. And
Right.
then the staff were same thing. And then they have the people who are facilitating the exercise go from room to room to kind of observe and see how you're navigating things. And one of the things I learned from that, which was really powerful, is that so in that closed room when I was with a group of administrators, we got this case study. It was basically like massive budget cuts, big trouble coming, like,
Right.
and my instinct right away was we need to go talk to our staff about this. And everyone at the table was like, no. We need to figure out what we're doing first. We need to, it basically like you need to take the time to learn it. And, because we've been trained as leaders to exude this confidence.
Right.
Of like, I have all the answers, you know, you can trust in me, I am infallible. And that's not the way. And so long story short, we get to the end of this exercise, and like, I did convince the administrators we should leave the room and go talk to the other groups. And we heard from the facilitators that they've been running this exercise for a long time, and that was the first time they'd ever seen the administrators leave the room. And
Wow. So they always did it in a bubble themselves.
they always did in a bubble. And it was basically, they were able to show us what the time lapse and time interpretation was of each one of the groups. Whereas the administrators, we were like, we're moving so fast and we're doing this and we're thinking and we're thinking and we're, you know, and the staff were like, why is it taking so long to get information? And we were all in the same 20 minutes or whatever it was. And so that really, like, I feel like everyone who's going into a leadership position should go through an exercise like that to really get the perspective and look through the lens of folks who are in the dark. Because when you don't have that information, you spin up your own narratives, things start going sideways. Like, people, they get stressed, they just start kind of, you know, things happen. That's what brings cultures, I think, to their knees, is that when people are feeling in the dark and out of control, they fill the time with something else other than
Well, that's exactly it. When you have a culture that is not as supportive and open, that's why I was interested in diving into it a few minutes, because I've seen cultures where the rumor mill runs the organization, and they don't have that collaborative effort. And for people who are starting out and working in their careers, they got to realize you need to figure out that right culture to really embrace.
Yeah. Well, in academia too, I mean, I know, you know, this is, well, it's not specific to academia, sure, but that's the area with which I'm the most familiar. There definitely is something to be said for egos and for, you know, the art of information brokering that people undertake for political reasons. Like, it happens. And it could be a holdover from the institution's culture in higher ed. Like, in higher education, we're forced to compete against one another for shared pools of funding when we should actually be working together toward the same goals.
Oh, but that's higher ed. You're forced to compete, but at the same point, you have to collaborate with others across institutions to get the research dollars and everything else.
Yeah.
But along that same path, as we talk about higher ed and everything else, have you ever had like a big failure in your career that you had to learn from? Oh, I guess we did.
Oh, so many. I don't know if I can pick just one. I don't, like, what kind of failure are you talking? Are you talking
Well, I'm talking about something that you remember in life that, you know what, this is a learning experience for me that I gained from when it was something I tripped over, and it could be something minor, it could be whatever. We've all had those in our lives, so.
Well, I think rather than a specific event, because I fortunately, again, knock on wood, haven't had any disastrous things occur where it was like I started something and lost a lot of money, or there was like a data breach, or, you know, like no event like that, thankfully. But thematically, again, I'm going to look at humans as the radical element.
Okay.
One of the things that I've had to deal with on multiple occasions throughout the course of my career at different institutions, I apply to a job, I get the job, and I get moved into management really quickly. And I have had at certain institutions end up, you know, being hired the same day as a person and then end up becoming their boss 6 months later. Okay. And navigating the challenges of going from peer to supervisor is some of the hardest work that I have experienced, at least in my career. And it's something that, you know I've made mistakes in the past of like, and I still do. I'm still navigating it. Like how much, you know, as we're trying to lean into empath, you know, empathetic and leadership and radical candor and all of that. Like how much do you share? What's too much? I feel like I've gone in the other direction because I'm kind of a private person,
Right.
where it's just like, you know, kind of negotiating that. Like I feel like the mistake that I've made in the past is that I have buttoned myself up too much to be like, this is how I've been trained to be, instead of like leaning into the authenticity and just being like, okay, I'm showing up as who I am.
Right.
If it's not a fit, I have to be prepared to like move in another direction. Like you should never have to. Some of the best career advice I've ever been given, as I've thought about like, whoa, you know, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And whatnot, is ultimately you want to land in a place where you feel comfortable, where you feel like you can be yourself. Like you don't have to mask, where you don't have to, you know, put up some artifice to be a part of a culture that ultimately you don't feel like you belong to it.
Right.
And that can be one of the toughest journeys that you can, you know, take in your life, is finding a place where you feel like you really belong. um and that's, I mean, I think that's a big part of like successful career navigation, because like, as you well know, like working with a lot of undergrads, like I work with so many students, they're so freaking sharp, like know so many different things, have so many transferable skills, and I'm like, I couldn't ever even predict like what you're gonna land in
Right.
doing, you know. But it's that, like, you know, a place where you feel like you can fit, like that is the biggest thing, because you spend most of your life working, unfortunately.
Oh, that's
So
right. And
it's
that, and I
better
think,
be a place where you feel comfortable, or it's gonna be.
and I think you nailed it on the head there. You spend a ton of your time working and everything else. And I
Yeah.
think this was a great conversation, Sarah. I really appreciate it. Is there any last bit of information you want to share before we wrap up for this evening?
Hmm. I guess that I was never um, one of those kiddos or teens or young adults who had a strong idea about what I wanted to do. And that can be really scary. And now that I am, you know, on the other side of middle age, I can report that it's okay. It's okay not to know. It's okay to be, you know, to explore, and would encourage that, because I feel like that's the most valuable and transferable skill that anybody has to offer in any career, is that curiosity, inquisitive nature, and willingness to question what is, because our world right now is so different and ever changing, and so that questioning is really going to position people well.
That's great, and that's a great thing. Sarah, thank you so much for your time. It's been interactive and exciting, and I'm enjoying the whole insights. And your insight and your valuable resources is really helpful, and I know it will be helpful to so many others who are going to listen to this podcast. So, thank
Great,
you.
so glad. I'm hoping